Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 30-Minute Gospel. My name is Chris, and I'll be your host as we open and study the Bible together. I'll be reading from the King James Version, but you can feel free to read whichever translation that best suits you. I would just recommend that you have a version that does not delete verses from God's holy word. Each video will be a biblical teaching of 30 minutes or less. My material is completely 100% free, so you can share these videos with family members, co-workers, friends, or anyone you know who either needs to hear the Word of God or wants to study it in a casual setting. The gospel is free to all, so I will not accept any donations, gifts, or beg viewers for money. Please give to your local church or a Christian organization of your choosing. You can reach out to me with questions or comments at 30minutegospel@gmail.com, but please keep your message respectful and cordial. Well, welcome again, everybody, to the 30-Minute Gospel. We're going to continue on. Excuse me, let me fix this camera a little bit. There we go. There we are. And yeah, we're gonna be continuing on a study that we were doing, where the last week we were talking about misused Bible verses, ones that have been twisted and kind of been misused throughout the years and centuries within the Christian church to justify things for doctrine, and so we're just going to go over these verses that we see a lot, and I have 14 of them. There's probably many more, but these are just kind of like the 14 that I think are the most egregious. Last week we discussed "Judge not." You know, a lot of people like to use that, and Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, saith the Lord. And we talked and shot down all the theories on those two using other Bible verses, and just kind of discussing that. So today we're going to move on to Romans 8:28. Okay. Romans 8:28. This is a very famous verse. Lots of people know this one. Some of you all can quote these. Like I said, some of you all can quote these verses by heart that I'm going to be talking about. But if you go to Romans chapter 8 and verse 28, it says this. It says, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose." Now, some of y'all have heard that before. Now, one of the things that we want to talk about is what a lot of people will say this. He says, God works all things together. So a lot of people, especially some of those hyper Calvinists and people that believe God controls everything, they come up and say, well, God uses all things work together for God's purpose. But that's not what it says. It says, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God. So who is this talking about? That's the children of God. That is Christians. Only are all things going to work together for our good. Okay? God is only doing that for our good. God is not doing that. All things that work together for good, it does not say that for people. It says you have to love God for God to work those things together for your good. If you don't love God, he's not doing that. Okay, does that make sense? Now, a good thing, for example, I'll use this as an example. Let's say you take you take a woman, who gets um, raped, okay, by a man. We'll just say that is forced to have sex with a man. She was forced to do that against her will. These sorts of things. Okay. Did God cause that? No, it doesn't say, and we know that all things work together. It doesn't say, and all things God caused. It doesn't say that. A lot of people read that into that verse, that it says that all things basically, because God works all things, then all things must be from God. No, what it means is God can take situations that are maybe not are that happen that we can get ourselves in and turn it around for good. So, like I was saying, if you look at a woman who was forced to have sex against her will, okay, that's not from God. That is satanic, and that's horrible that happened to that woman. But what God can do for that woman in that case is maybe she will find or co-found or something like that, an organization, a Christian that offers Christian counseling and help for women who have experienced the same thing. Okay, does that make sense? And the women can get biblical help and counseling because of that situation. That's the kind of thing that he's talking about. God took a situation that was horrible and made it into something for the better. Does that make sense? That this organization can come out of it. Okay, it's not saying God wanted the rape to happen so this organization could happen, but God saw the situation and saw that, but then out of that birthed something positive. That's what it's talking about. It says, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God. Okay, so you have to love God for that to happen. If you're not loving God, not all things are going to work together for your good. Okay, so if I'm somebody that is um, a Christian, okay, and something bad happens to me, I know that in the end God will work that in my favor. If I'm not a Christian and something bad happens to me, God isn't going to be working that in my favor. Okay, I have to love God in order for that to happen. All right. It's not saying all things that happen to me are from God because God wants all these things to happen and works it into my life. That's not what the verse is saying. It says it's working good for those that love God. Okay? So you have to love God in order for that to happen. Let's just say you have a Christian man, he loves God, okay? Now, let's just say the Christian man makes a mistake, drinks too much and gets into a car wreck. Okay, maybe he has a little problem with alcohol or something like that, and he gets into a car wreck, a drunk driving car wreck. Well, that may that car wreck may be used for him and the consequences of that to push him to Alcoholics Anonymous and get set free from that. So you see, God used that situation to set him free from his alcohol addiction. Okay, that's what happens. Now, can this happen to a non-believer? Yeah, maybe, but the issue is that God's not doing it for them. God's only doing it for those that he loves. That's what the verse says. You have to love him in order for all things to work together for your good. Okay? And it's not saying like some of the hyper Calvinists saying that all things because God does this, that everything that happens is from God. That's not what it's saying. It says, and we know that all things work together. It doesn't say, and we know that all things are caused by God. That is not what it says. But a lot of them read that in there. They love God, and it says, to them who are called according to his purpose. Okay? What is his purpose? His will is that all be saved. And he's calling sinners, so he's calling everybody. So anybody that loves him has already been called. And they're called for what purpose? To be saved. Okay? So that's what it is. So he's working all things together. So I hope everybody understands that. But you have to love him. Ephesians 1 talks about this. Okay, so if you go to the book of Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 11, um, it says, in whom also we have obtained an inheritance. And obtained an inheritance, being predestinated according to the purpose of him who worketh all things after the counsel of his own will. Okay? So it says, we also have obtained an inheritance. This is where the Calvinists get this wrong too. They say, being predestinated according to the purpose of him who worketh all things. He doesn't work all things after the counsel of his own will. Okay? He does not everything is his will. We know that not everything is his will, okay, because we know that. But it says he works all things after, according to the purpose of his will. But it says over here, it says he works all things together for the good. Okay, for them that love them. So this is what it's talking about. It says, in whom we also have obtained an inheritance. Why have we obtained an inheritance? Because we believed in him. We love God. Okay, so we love God, and it says we have obtained an inheritance, having predestinated according to the purpose of Him who works all things. Well, who works he works all things for what? For those that love Him. For who? For those who love Him. You have to love Him so that He can work all things after the counsel of His own will. You see, those verses come together. Romans 8:28, just to kind of slow it down, we get it here. It says, "And we know that all things work together for good for them that love Him." And in Ephesians 1:11 it says, "According to the purpose of Him who worketh all things after the counsel of His own will." That's what it says, according to His purpose, according to His will. That's what it's talking about. You have to love Him, and He works all things for those who love Him. That's what Ephesians 1:11 is talking about. It's referring back to 8:28. Okay, Romans 8:28. Okay, so Ephesians 1 is talking about Him who worketh all things after the counsel. Well, the question is, who's He doing this for? Those who love Him. Okay, because it says, in Him, in whom we have also obtained. Who? We're His children. So He's working, because we have there, He's working all things after the counsel of His own will. For us. That's what it is. And that's for us too as well. Okay, so I hope you guys understand that. Okay, Romans 8:29, right after. This is another one. This is one of the Calvinists' favorite verses. Calvinists love the predestinated. The predestination only appears in two books, and it appears in three verses, I think. I think it's like three verses in the whole Bible, but they base their whole theology off of this. Okay? But it says here in verse 29, for it says, "For whom He did foreknow, He also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren." Okay. The way the Calvinists read this is predestinated to salvation. So they believe people are predestined to salvation. It's not what the verse says. The verse does not say that at all. Okay? It says, "For whom He did foreknow, He also did predestinate to salvation." That's not what it says. It says, "to be conformed to the image of His Son." So, He foreknew, He also predestinated to be conformed to the image of His own Son. Okay? Not to be saved. What it's saying there is, if you're a believer, you have been predestinated to become like Christ. That's called sanctification. Okay? Once you're a believer and once you are justified, then you are predestined to be sanctified. It is not a person, a lost person. None of these verses ever talk about a lost person being predestined for salvation. It does not say that, okay? You are not to salvation, but be conformed to the image of His Son. You must believe, and then you are predestinated. That's how this works, okay? All right? So this word foreknew here, we're going to do that one real quick before we go into more of the predestinated, but I want to understand this. It says, "For whom He did foreknow, He also predestinated." Okay? Now, this is the foreknowledge of God. I know the Calvinists don't want to admit this. Okay? God has foreknowledge, and He knows who would believe and who wouldn't believe. It's that simple. Either He has foreknowledge or He doesn't have foreknowledge. Okay? But they want to make it. See, this verse says, "For whom He did foreknow." So what does that mean? The people that are predestinated to be conformed to the image of the Son are people He knew from beforehand who were going to believe. Okay? That's what that means. The way the Calvinists get around this is they say that foreknew is like similar to the way Adam knew his wife Eve. Okay, they say it's the way he knew his wife Eve, and meaning having sex with her. So it's like, so what does that mean? God had sex with these people? No, they'll say God loved these people, these certain people, from the beginning of time. He only loved a certain group of people, and those are the people that he foreknew or foreloved and then predestinated to salvation. It doesn't say that. They totally read that into that verse. That is not what that verse says at all, period, in the story. Doesn't say it. They've come up with that. Okay? It says, we know this because if you look at the Greek word for foreknow there in that verse, in verse 29, it's the word prognostics. Okay? It's the Greek word prognostics. Okay? It's where we get the word prognosis from. Okay? Prognosis. Pro meaning before, gnostics meaning knowledge. For knowledge. It doesn't say pro agape. That would be for loving, or porophilios, or whatever other Greek word means for love. It doesn't say it's new. Prognosis means, if you know anything about the word prognosis, it's in the medical term, the prognosis is the outcome of a disease. Okay, they call it a prognosis because the doctors can predict how this disease is going to play out because they've seen it before. Okay, it's to know beforehand. That's what it means. It's to know beforehand how this disease is going to is going to progress. Okay, that's what it means. Prognosis. Prognosis is pro, not before. Not prognosis. Gnosis is knowledge. Okay, if you've ever heard of the Gnostics, okay, they were a group of knowledge. That's what the Greek word means. Okay, so they, the medical term knows beforehand what will happen to you with this disease. Like, for example, if you got a prognosis for ALS, they say, well, the average person that has ALS, this will happen at 4 months, or this will happen at 8 months, this will happen at a year, in 2 years or 3 years, you'll be like this, you'll be in a wheelchair, you'll be this, and then you'll die. That's essentially what they say. That's the prognosis. And it's their foreknowledge. That's what it's talking about. It's talking about in God's foreknowledge for those he foreknew. So in his foreknowledge, he knew who was going to believe. We already know this. Why? Because it says it in the book of John. Jesus is talking to a crowd of people in the Pharisees, and it says, and Jesus knew from the beginning who would not believe. That's what it says. It says he knew from the beginning. What is that? That's foreknowledge. That's God's foreknowledge. He already knew who was going to believe. So you can just add on to that. That's what he knows. Okay? And he is not, those that he foreknew, he didn't pick out just for salvation. Those he foreknew, those he knew that were going to believe in his son, are the ones who are predestinated to be justified, to be justified, or they already are justified. They're the ones that are going to be sanctified or conformed to his image. Okay, the word foreknowledge, you know, Paul talks about it in Acts chapter, in Acts 2. He's talking about, and Jesus Christ, who was crucified based on the foreknowledge of God. God already knew this. Okay, he already knew this. He already knew what was going to happen. All right. That's what it is. It says that it was his foreplay. But I've actually seen where in the uh, uh, concordance of some of these books, of some of these Bibles, where it says foreknowledge also means foreordained. That does not what it means. Foreordained and foreknowledge are two separate things, but they try to conflate them together. Well, since Jesus already had God already had foreknowledge, that means he already ordained these events to happen. That does not mean, an ordination means just because you allow something to happen does not mean that's what you wanted to happen. Okay? A judge can look at a person who got caught with a DUI and says, if you keep doing these DUIs, you're going to kill somebody. And if one day that guy gets drunk and kills somebody, that does not mean because the judge had foreknowledge that that was probably going to happen, does not mean that he wanted it to happen and so he ordained it. That's just Calvinist speak to justify this. Okay, that's them. That's some philosophical thing. Well, if he allows something to happen, that means that's what he wanted. That was his will. Well, there's a lot of things that happen in this country. Does that mean that's the will of Donald Trump or our government? No, it's not. That's a very stupid argument. Okay, so God had foreknowledge of this. God had foreknowledge. He has a foreknowledge of events, and that's what He does. Okay, He loves. It says He predestinated these people, um, um, and He predestinated these people to be sanctified, not to be saved. You see foreknowledge come up in 1 Peter 1:2 as well. So if you go to 1 Peter. Um, 1 Peter 1:2, it says, um, we'll start there. It says, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. It says, elect according to the foreknowledge of God the Father through sanctification of the Spirit, unto obedience and sprinkling of the blood of Jesus Christ. Grace unto you and peace be multiplied. See, it says, what does it say? It says, elect according to the foreknowledge of God. Not the foreloving. They'll try to do that again. That's the foreloving. It's not. It's the word prognostics again. It's the Greek word prognostics. It means to know beforehand. Okay? These people are elect or chosen by God based upon His foreknowledge of what? Their choice in salvation. It has to be based on something. It's based on nothing. It's just based on nothing. God just randomly chooses. So God's arbitrary. No, He's not arbitrary. Yet then that makes Him arbitrary. That makes Him arbitrary like Allah's arbitrary. Okay? No. It's not. It's because He has a foreknowledge of that. Okay? You are not predestinated. You must believe in order to be saved and sanctified. Okay? 1 Corinthians 1:21. Okay, we're getting back to that. So if you go to 1 Corinthians 1:21. 1 Corinthians 1:21 says this, for after that in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. It pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. Okay? So who does God save? He saves those that He chose. He foreloved. No, He saves those that believe. You must believe, and then when you believe, you're predestined. Okay, we'll talk about this in Ephesians chapter 1 too, as well. And it says that, in 1 Corinthians, that's what it says in 1:21. So you must be saved. You must believe to be saved. It doesn't say He caused belief in those that He saved. Okay, it says he saves those that believe. Okay, so you have to believe to be saved in order to be predestinated for sanctification. Okay, and God already knows who is going to do that. All right, that's what we're waiting on right now. What are we waiting on? We're waiting for the last person that God knows is going to accept Jesus Christ as His Lord and Savior before the rapture of the church will happen and the end times will come. That's what we're waiting on. Okay, John chapter 1 also mentions something similar in here to kind of help this out in the understanding. Okay, John chapter 1 verse 11 says this. It says, He came unto His own, and His own received Him not. Well, who are His own? Wouldn't his own be the elect, the chosen ones? But they didn't receive him. Okay? But it says, but as many as received him, to them he gave the power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. Okay, so you have to receive him and you have to believe on his name, and then he gave them power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. It says, but as many received him, then they received the power. You have to receive him. That means it's up to you. Okay, that's a big thing that Calvinists don't understand. Okay, they have a big problem with this. They believe that God just makes you believe, but that's not the case. God requires something of man always before he does things. Okay, always. For example, if you look at the Moses and the Red Sea, God told Moses, pull up your staff, point up your staff into the sky, and then the sea will part. Hold up your staff and then the sea will part. If Moses hadn't hold up his staff, the sea wouldn't have parted. He told him, strike your staff into the water and it will become blood. There's always an act of faith that has to come in there, always before God acts. There has to be an act of faith. God's going to require something of you as an act of faith to trust him before he does anything. And belief is one of those things. Belief is a very small thing. All you have to do is believe, and then God does everything else. But God is not going to force you to believe. There's nothing in the Bible that says he forces anybody to believe. He came into his own, and his own received him not. Why? What? You see, that's the thing is, why would he come into his own if God had already planned for them not to believe anyway? He didn't want the Jews to believe because he had a big plan. Why would Jesus waste his time with the Jews? Why wouldn't he just go to the Gentiles? That seems like a waste of time. Okay? You have to receive him. Okay? So that idea of being predestinated, you are not predestinated towards salvation. You are predestinated for sanctification, to be conformed to the image of his Son. And we'll see that in Ephesians 1. And those that God foreknew, in order to be, it's basically you have to be saved. Well, how do you have to be saved? You have to believe. Once you believe, then you're predestinated to be conformed to the image of his Son. You are not predestinated for salvation. Nobody is. God may know it, but foreknowledge, knowing, is not foreordaining somebody's damnation or not. Okay? That person had their own free will. All right? Does that make sense? So everyone understands that in the foreknowledge is not for loving. Don't listen to what the Calvinists say. It's not for loving. It is foreknowledge. It is actual foreknowledge. He knows the events before they're going to happen. Okay, that's a big misunderstanding. We're going to talk about Ephesians 1 in the next video. We're going to go over that verse and a lot of other verses dealing with that are very confusing. And some of these verses are used by like I said, they're used by the charismatics, like Jeremiah 29:11. But a lot of them are used by Calvinists because they don't understand the Bible. They don't understand how these verses work, and they don't understand. They just believe we're all robots, and that's the problem. They run under the assumption that God controls everything, and he doesn't. Well, I thank you all for tuning in. I encourage you to like the video and subscribe to the channel and share this video with anybody that you may know. On my Rumble and YouTube page, I have a video called Peace with God, the gospel message. Please send that out to anybody you may know who needs to hear the gospel, because we need to get that message out as much as we possibly can. Okay. I also have a Facebook page, 30-Minute Gospel with Chris. You can like and follow that page. And I also have an email. You can email me at 30minutegospel@gmail.com. Well, I thank everybody again, and I will leave you with this. Remember, just as Theodore Roosevelt once said, a thorough knowledge of the Bible is worth more than a college education. God bless you all.